Hello, my name is Katie Groves, and this is part 19 in my series about deprogramming from trauma-based mind control. If you've not done so already, I ask that you please watch the first two parts of this series linked in the description below for disclaimers and safety measures you can take while watching these videos. In this video, I'm going to talk about gender identity programming and how I've learned to deprogram myself around conceptual thought forms about gender identity. Now, my last video, I talked about my story with gender identity programming and with my own issues with gender that go beyond the programming, and how I've learned to integrate and heal around these issues and find who I really am on the gender spectrum. But I figure it would be helpful to talk more in depth about some of the ways that I've been programmed around gender and some of the mechanics of the deprogramming process. One of the basic ways slaves are programmed, as I've shared before, is through duality. And the duality of binary gender is no exception. American culture, as well as many other cultures, is very rooted in concepts of binary gender, right? You're either a man or a woman, male or female, masculine or feminine. And in terms of sexual identity, a lot of people still seem to believe that you're either gay or straight. Biphobia has gotten a lot better, I think, but it's still rampant. So anyone who's in between, which Kinsey would argue is most of us, at least in terms of sexuality, may find themselves persecuted by this system. And in Monarch mind control, this system is even more compartmentalized and rigidly defined, in my experience. I was programmed to believe that there's only men and women, and I was programmed with awareness around transgender people, but there was a lot of hatred towards trans folk, and a lot of hatred towards people who are non-binary gender expressions and identities. And I was taught that very early on it was only acceptable to be male or female. Now, I had parts that were programmed to believe that we were male and to rigidly identify with that, just as rigidly as the female parts identified with being female. So I found in me there was this binary split between male and female, and that there were parts of me that were at odds with each other, at war, masculine parts that wanted to take over and give us hormones and surgeries and make us completely physically male. And I had feminine parts at the same time that were fighting this desperately and who wanted to present very stereotypically feminine. And it wasn't all black and white, but I'm talking about the programmed parts. I had parts of me on deeper levels that retained awareness of androgyny, of non-binary gender identity, who wanted us to be somewhere in the middle, who wanted us to express ourselves freely from our soul that goes beyond gender identity, and not from our mind, which categorizes things into little neat boxes like male and female. So coming into contact with those parts, the parts of me that had deeper understanding of gender and expression, who didn't have so much egoic identity wrapped up in it, who were not so entrenched in the programming, if at all, who could hold space for the parts that were viciously trying to defend their perceived notions of our gender identity and needed expression as a whole. I found that for every male part, there was often a female counterpart. That for duality programming, there was typically a split self that had been separated into two parts, one that believed it was one side of the duality and one that believed it was on the other side of the duality, and that these parts were at odds with each other. And this was a common structure that I found in my duality programming for any duality that I encountered. So this was no exception in my gender identity. I found that I would often have a male part on one side of the dividing line and a female part on another side. I did a lot of work in the beginning meditating on the concepts of the divine masculine and the feminine, I say concepts, but for me it quickly became the energies as I encountered in myself that I had a core self that had been split into 4 parts. I shared about that in a recent video. And in this core self, there was a dark feminine, a light feminine, a dark masculine, and a light masculine part. And these parts were representative of these 4 elements. So the feminine side had a light side and a shadow side, and the masculine side had a light side and a shadow side. And all these parts were more or less in conflict with each other. The light feminine and the light masculine seemed to be friends, and the dark masculine and the dark feminine seemed to be friends, but they all seemed to be at odds with each other, as in the light parts were at odds with their shadows. So learning to meditate on these concepts of divine masculine and feminine principles, to come in contact with these core elemental parts of myself, and accepting that both sides of the duality are okay, that if I want to present femininely one day, I can do so. If I want to present masculinely another day, I can do so. And giving parts of me the room to switch between gender identities more fluidly really helped. It also helped me tremendously to inform people around me that I was DID, or that I have DID, and that I have parts with multiple gender identities. Because frequently I would meet people who were confused about my male name or my presentation, and finding safe people who I could let in about the deeper nature of my gender identity struggles really helped, because I felt that I had to uphold these really rigid presentations with different people. So I'd have one person with whom I was only male, other people with whom I was only female, etc. And so to allow people in to see that I run a spectrum with my parts, and to choose how much I want to share. But it was very helpful for me, to let people know that I ran a spectrum, that I have multiple parts, and to explain a little bit about this. And it freed me up to have social interactions in which I was able to switch between parts, and in one moment speak in a high-pitched, more feminine voice, and another moment speak in a more masculine voice. In one moment talk about things that were stereotypically feminine, in another moment things that were stereotypically masculine. And now I've come to a place where I feel a lot more comfortable with all of this, and I don't have to tell people about my DID or my gender issues or anything. I just get to be myself and, say screw what other people think. But that's taken time and a lot of work. I was rigidly identified with the notion that I had to uphold some standards of gender identity and presentation that were designated by the cult, and that I had to be a certain way, or else I was unacceptable. And now I've learned that while nothing is unacceptable, as in cannot be accepted, that where I find my acceptance is in my expression of my true self. Where I find myself in the place of most acceptance of myself is when I am being my real self. And my real self is not gendered, goes beyond duality, and enjoys myriad forms of self-expression that do not have to be rooted in culturally defined notions of masculine and feminine. Okay, that's all I've got for this video. Thank you.